April 7th, 1945. Dawn broke over Tokyo Bay, painting the Japanese home islands with a pale, deceptive light that would soon reveal an impossible sight. 91 gleaming North American P-51D Mustangs from the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups sliced through the morning air, their Merlin engines humming a distant deadly tune. In the cramped yet remarkably comfortable cockpit of his Mustang, Major James B. Tapp felt the familiar, reassuring grip of the control stick. Below, the majestic snow-capped cone of Mount Fuji stood as an unmistakable beacon, its timeless beauty contrasting sharply with the destructive purpose unfolding in its shadow. This iconic peak served not only as a navigational point, but also as a stark visual reminder for the pilots that they were deep within enemy territory, a place thought unreachable for single-engine fighters. Each P-51D was a marvel of wartime engineering, armed with 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns meticulously loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. These weren't just standard bullets. They were designed to punch through aircraft skin and ignite flammable materials like fuel and oil. An early model P-51D, the workhorse of the American Air Forces, carried a staggering 2,800 rounds, 500 for each inboard gun and 270 for the center and outboard positions, a terrifying potential for a concentrated, withering rain of fire. Later variants would streamline this to 1,880 rounds for improved reliability, but the firepower remained devastating. The patchwork landscape below a mosaic of rice fields, quaint villages, and camouflaged military installations had never before witnessed the audacious presence of American single-engine fighters. Military planners just 2 years prior would have dismissed this mission as utterly suicidal, escorting heavy B-29 Superfortresses deep into the Japanese homeland from a distant base 750 miles away, a distance then deemed impossible for any single-engine aircraft. Yet, here they were, proving the impossible was merely a challenge awaiting American ingenuity. At precisely 07 hours, a vast swarm of over 100 Japanese interceptors converged on the American formation. Their pilots, scrambling from airfields around Tokyo, anticipated bomber formations. What they witnessed through the morning haze sent a profound shockwave through their ranks. Not just bombers, but dozens of American single-engine fighters soaring confidently over Tokyo. Their commanders had emphatically promised them this was an impossible scenario, a breach that simply could not occur. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. These weren't the familiar, relatively short-range carrier-based Navy fighters that might occasionally harass coastal areas. These were formidable land-based Army Air Force fighters, materializing as if from thin air after somehow traversing 750 miles of open ocean. The psychological blow alone was immense, signaling a complete loss of air superiority. Japan's best, the sleek Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, codenamed Frank by the Allies, their fastest and most advanced fighter, valiantly led the desperate defense, alongside older but still dangerous Ki-43. Hayabusas, Ki-44 Shokis, Ki-61 Hyans, and even venerable Navy A6M0s and the newer N1K2J Shiden Kais. On paper, the Ki-84 possessed impressive capabilities, boasting the ability to outclimb and outmaneuver both the P-51 and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt at certain altitudes and speeds. But what was about to unfold in the sprawling skies above the imperial capital would not only test individual courage, but would starkly reveal the vast and growing technological, industrial, and strategic chasm between two nations, fundamentally different approaches to air warfare, the genesis of dominance, a marriage of ingenuity. The North American P-51D Mustang arrived in the Pacific Theater with a legend already firmly carved in the bloody skies over Europe, where its presence had effectively broken the back of the formidable Luftwaffe and made sustained daylight bombing of Germany a viable and devastating strategy. Its genesis was a tale of an improbable Anglo-American collaboration that yielded aviation's most potent fighter. Initially developed by North American Aviation for export to Britain, early models were hampered by underpowered Allison engines. It was the visionary British, specifically Rolls-Royce, who first proposed fitting their powerful Merlin engine into the P-51 airframe. This stroke of genius transformed a good aircraft into a masterpiece. The American version, powered by the Packard 1657 engine, a license-built version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66, became the cornerstone of Allied air superiority. This engine delivered up to an astonishing 1720 horsepower in emergency war power settings with water injection, a colossal amount of power for a piston engine. Crucially, its sophisticated two-stage, two-speed supercharger system was a game-changer. This complex piece of engineering could maintain high performance and deliver dense, oxygen-rich air to the cylinders at altitudes exceeding 25,000 feet, precisely where Japanese engines, with their simpler, single-stage superchargers, often choked and gasped for air, losing power dramatically. The P-51D was not merely fast, it was a high-altitude, long-range predator. It soared to a maximum speed of approximately 440 mph at 25,000 feet, boasting an operational ceiling of almost 42,000 feet, far above most enemy fighters. Its standard armament of 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, mounted in the wings, might seem less impressive than the larger caliber cannons favored by some Axis aircraft. However, the mathematics of firepower were devastatingly and precisely calculated. Each M2 Browning fired at an astounding rate of 800 rounds per minute, meaning a P-51D could unleash 4,800 rounds per minute, 80 rounds every second of concentrated high-velocity firepower. Each armor-piercing incendiary round weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering tremendous kinetic energy on impact. This torrent of fire was capable of penetrating aircraft armor, igniting fuel tanks, and destroying engines with just a few well-placed hits, rather than relying on the single massive impact of a cannon round. By late 1944, Mustangs dominated the U.S. 8th Air Force in Europe, with 14 of its 15 fighter squadrons composed almost entirely of P-51s, a testament to its unparalleled superiority over all other available fighters. This massive production and deployment reflected American industrial might at its absolute peak. Factories in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, churned out P-51s at an astonishing rate. Assembly lines ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Mustang rolled off the assembly line every hour. By war's end, an incredible 15,586 P-51s of all variants were built, with the D model alone accounting for 8,106 more than Japan's total fighter production of all types in the last 2 years of the war combined. The Mustang's very long-range capability was not merely an incremental improvement, it was a revolution in fighter operations. With dual 110-gallon disposable drop tanks, P-51s routinely flew round trips of 1,500 statute miles and pushed to 1,600 miles when absolutely necessary. To put this in perspective, this was equivalent to flying from Los Angeles to Little Rock, Arkansas, entirely over open water, in a single-engine aircraft with no alternate landing sites save the vast, unforgiving ocean. The secret to this astounding achievement lay in two critical factors: the Merlin engine's exceptional fuel efficiency at cruise settings, consuming a mere 65 gallons per hour at economical cruise, and the P-51's revolutionary laminar-flow wing design. Developed by North American's aerodynamicist Edgar Schmood, this wing reduced drag by 35% compared to conventional airfoils by maintaining smooth airflow over a greater percentage of the wing surface, delaying the transition to turbulent flow and dramatically reducing parasitic drag. This combination of efficient power and advanced aerodynamics was the foundation of the Mustang's unprecedented endurance. Japan's desperate gamble, the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate. In stark, painful contrast to American industrial and technological prowess stood the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate. Entering operational service with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service in June 1944, it was already too late and produced in numbers far too few to meaningfully affect the war's outcome. Named Gale and codenamed Frank by the Allies, this fighter represented Japan's desperate last-ditch attempt to match American technological superiority with the dwindling resources remaining to an embattled empire. The Ki-84 is generally considered the best Japanese fighter to operate in large numbers during the conflict, though the term large numbers was relative. What Japan considered mass production, America would have dismissed as merely prototype runs. The aircraft boasted impressive on-paper specifications, high speed and excellent maneuverability, with an armament of two 30mm Ho-5 cannons and two 20mm Ho-5 cannons, giving it formidable potential firepower. However, the grim reality was far more complex. The 30mm cannons carried only 50 rounds per gun, and the 20mm cannons just 150 rounds per gun, giving a total ammunition load of a mere 400 rounds compared to the Mustang's vastly superior 1880 to 2800 rounds. This severely limited combat engagement time for Japanese pilots. On paper, the Ki-84 appeared competitive, even superior in some respects. It was powered by the Nakajima Ha-45 Homare 18-cylinder radial engine, a theoretically complex and advanced piece of machinery featuring fuel injection and a single-stage two-speed supercharger, often augmented by water methanol injection to aid the supercharger in delivering a rated 2,000 horsepower takeoff. Initial testing showed promise, with prototypes reaching 387 mph in level flight, and later claims of up to 427 mph under ideal conditions with high-octane fuel and perfect engine tuning. Yet, the reality of late-war Japanese production told a dramatically different story, one of declining quality, desperate improvisation, and systemic failure. Pilots and ground crews in the field quickly learned to treat the plane's high-maintenance Homare engine with extreme care, and its landing gear was notoriously prone to buckling at the worst possible moments. The Homare engine, while theoretically powerful and advanced, suffered from chronic reliability problems that worsened exponentially as quality control collapsed. The engine required precise tolerances that Japanese factories, under constant B-29 bombardment and severely lacking quality steel and aluminum, could no longer maintain. Many landing gear units were compromised by the poor quality heat treatment of late-war Japanese steel, often containing impurities that made proper hardening impossible. As a result, countless Hayates suffered strut collapses on landing, writing off aircraft that Japan could not afford to lose, and, even more tragically, killing experienced pilots that took months to train. The profound disparity in production quality reflected the broader industrial crisis facing Japan, a nation that had gambled everything on a short, decisive war and lost. While American factories maintained consistent quality standards despite massive production volumes, actually improving quality as production techniques were refined and standardized, Japanese manufacturing deteriorated precipitously. Progressive deterioration, and quality control meant that pilots never knew how an individual aircraft would perform, whether the brakes would work, whether the engine would hold together at high power settings, and even whether they would be able to climb high enough to intercept B-29 Superfortresses cruising at 3,000 feet. By 1945, Japan had produced only 35 and 14 Ki-84s total, and a significant portion of these were grounded due to a crippling lack of spare parts, fuel, or qualified pilots. Of those that were nominally operational, perhaps half could be considered truly combat-ready at any given time. The fuel situation alone revealed the strategic catastrophe facing Japan, a nation that had gone to war partly to secure vital oil resources. While American pilots flew with 100-octane aviation gasoline, shipped from vast refineries in Texas and California fuel, specifically formulated for high-performance engines, Japanese pilots had to make do with whatever could be produced domestically or painstakingly synthesized from coal. Late-war Japanese aviation fuel often tested at a dismal 87 octane or lower, sometimes as low as 80 octane, severely robbing engines of power and causing destructive pre-ignition that destroyed cylinders, pistons, and valves. Some desperate units even attempted to supplement their fuel with pine root oil extracted from pine stumps, alcohol distilled from sweet potatoes, and even sack production byproducts, further degrading engine performance and reliability. Pilots reported engines that would barely start, ran rough at all power settings, and frequently failed catastrophically in flight, turning every mission into a gamble. The first encounter. A psychological blow and a tactical triumph. On that fateful first April 7th mission, the Mustangs precisely formed up with their charges, 103 behemoth Boeing B-29 Superfortresses of the 73rd Bomb Wing, each carrying tons of incendiary bombs destined for Japanese industrial targets and urban areas. Captain Art Bridge of the 45th Fighter Squadron vividly recalled the scene. It was a real spectacle. The 29ths were just finishing their assembly in a grand circle as we arrived. The sun glinted off their aluminum skin, and they looked like a school of giant silver fish swimming through the sky. The rendezvous itself represented a monumental triumph of navigation and meticulous planning that would have been impossible without the vast array of American technological advantages. The P-51s had flown an astonishing 750 miles over open ocean, navigating primarily by dead reckoning, basic radio compass, and carefully calculated timing, matching their arrival to the bomber's schedule within minutes. They had climbed gradually from sea level to 25,000 feet, their advanced Merlin engines automatically adjusting fuel mixture as they ascended, their superchargers seamlessly transitioning from low to high blower to maintain crucial power. As they crossed the heavily defended coast of Honshu, the P-51 pilots executed a crucial maneuver. They jettisoned their 110-gallon auxiliary wing tanks. The silver drop tanks tumbled earthward, glinting in the morning sun, some exploding on impact, others bouncing across rice paddies, marking the beginning of the engagement as they spotted the first head-on feints from a force of more than 100 Japanese interceptors scrambling from multiple airfields around Tokyo. The Japanese pilots, flying a mixed force of Ki-84s, Ki-43s, Ki-44s, Ki-61s, and Navy fighters including Zeros and the new N-1K2J Shiden Kai, experienced their first profound shock. These were not the limited-range Navy carrier fighters they had occasionally encountered. These were powerful land-based fighters that had somehow reached the homeland from bases they had been assured were impossibly distant. Flight Sergeant Totana Mizu, flying a Ki-84 with the 56th Sentai, later vividly recalled his disbelief. When we were scrambled, we were told enemy fighters were approaching Tokyo. We thought it must be a mistake. Perhaps they meant enemy bombers. When I saw the Mustangs with my own eyes, I thought I was dreaming. It was impossible. Our commanders had assured us that no American fighter could reach Japan from their island bases. Yet there they were, dozens of them, flying as if they owned our sky. In that moment, I knew the war was truly lost. Major James B. Tapp, who would go on to become an ace with 8 confirmed victories, was one of the first Mustang pilots to tear into a formation of Japanese fighters. His combat report, written with clinical precision hours after the mission, described the engagement. They came at us in the traditional 3-plane shot formation, but their coordination was poor. The flight leader would commit to an attack, but his wingmen often failed to follow through. They seemed hesitant, perhaps low on fuel or ammunition, or simply inexperienced. We dove through them with 100 mph speed advantage, fired quick bursts, and zoom climbed back to altitude before they could react. This significant breakdown in Japanese tactical coordination reflected the profound crisis in pilot training that had reached catastrophic proportions. By 1945, most experienced Japanese pilots were dead, killed over the Solomons, New Guinea, the Philippines, or in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Their replacements received as little as 50 hours of flight training before being thrown into combat, a stark contrast to the 600 hours American pilots received before even deploying to combat theaters. When the smoke cleared and the Mustangs returned to their Iwo Jima base, the Sunsetters of 7th Fighter Command were credited with 26 Japanese planes destroyed, 1 probable, and 5 damaged, at a cost of only 2 P-51s and 1 pilot. This astounding 13-to-1 kill ratio on this first mission would only improve as American pilots gained invaluable experience over Japan, and Japanese pilot quality continued its precipitous deterioration. Within weeks, kill ratios of 20-to-1 or even 30-to-1 would become common, reflecting not just American technological and training superiority, but Japanese desperation. The unsurmountable gap. Technology and training in the crucible of combat. The performance differential between the aircraft became starkly apparent in combat, particularly in the vertical dimension, where air combat was increasingly fought. The P-51D's superiority was especially evident above 2,000 feet, the critical altitude where most bomber interceptions took place. At these lofty altitudes, the Merlin engine's ingenious 2-stage supercharger maintained nearly sea-level power. The first stage compressed the thin air, cooled it through an intercooler, then fed it to the second stage for further compression, delivering dense oxygen-rich air to the cylinders, ensuring maximum engine performance. In stark contrast, the Ki-84's single-stage supercharger, lacking an intercooler and a second stage, caused power to drop off dramatically above 2,000 feet, severely reducing its speed advantage and climb rate precisely where most interceptions occurred. At 3,000 feet, the Ki-84 could barely maintain 350 mph, while the P-51D could still achieve a blistering 420 mph, giving American pilots a decisive advantage in speed, climb, and maneuverability. Lieutenant Jerry Yellen of the 78th Fighter Squadron, who would fly the last combat mission of the war on August 14, 1945, August 15 in Japan due to the international dateline, described a typical engagement with vivid detail. We'd spot them climbing up to meet us, leaving dark exhaust trails as they firewalled their throttles. But by 25,000 feet, they were wallowing like fish out of water. Their engines were smoking, probably running too rich because their superchargers couldn't provide enough air. We'd dive through their formation with our 50s blazing, the tracers looking like laser beams, and they simply couldn't match our speed in the dive or our zoom climb afterward. Our Merlin would sing as we pulled up, G-forces crushing us into our seats, while their radials would cough and sputter, struggling to maintain power. The P-51D could execute controlled dives at speeds approaching 500 mph, its laminar-flow wings remaining effective even in the transonic regime, maintaining critical control authority. Japanese fighters, conversely, often experience dangerous control reversal or catastrophic structural failure at speeds above 400 mph in a dive, their control surfaces blanking out or their wings literally tearing off. The contrast in pilot quality was devastating and grew worse with each passing day. American pilots arriving at Iwo Jima typically had 400 to 600 hours of flight time, including 100-plus hours in the P-51 type, dozens of hours of intensive gunnery practice, and extensive combat training against experienced instructors, flying captured enemy aircraft or accurate simulations. They had practiced formation, flying until it was second nature, instrument navigation in all weather conditions, deflection shooting at towed targets, and complex combat tactics developed from 3 grueling years of air warfare experience. Japanese pilots in 1945 often had less than 100 hours total time, sometimes as little as 30 hours. With minimal gunnery practice due to severe ammunition shortages, no instrument training, and combat tactics learned from outdated manuals rather than from experienced instructors who were almost all dead or flying combat missions themselves. The navigation challenge alone separated the capable from the doomed, the living from the soon-to-be dead. Flying single-engine fighters on 1,500-mile round trips over a vast, featureless ocean with minimal navigation aids required a profound confidence, born of extensive experience and absolute trust in both their machine and robust support systems. American pilots flew with detailed weather briefings compiled from submarine weather reports and reconnaissance flights, accurate maps updated from photo reconnaissance, and functioning instruments manufactured to precise specifications. They had rescue submarines strategically stationed along their route lifeguard league, submarines that saved dozens of downed airmen and could rely on Dumbo PBY Catalina flying boats to rescue them if forced down. Japanese pilots increasingly flew with outdated maps that didn't show recent bomb damage, notoriously unreliable compasses that hadn't been properly calibrated, and virtually no hope of rescue if downed over water. Their life rafts, if they had them at all, often leaked, and their emergency rations had usually been consumed during severe food shortages on the ground. The magnetic variation between Iwo Jima and Tokyo in 1945 was a convenient 3° west, and since Tokyo lay between the 139th and 140th meridians, while Iwo Jima was between the 141st and 142nd, navigation was simplified to basic compass headings for the return flight, a fortunate geographic coincidence that undoubtedly saved many American lives. This geographical coincidence proved crucial when weather deteriorated, or pilots became disoriented in combat, their compasses spinning wildly as they maneuvered. A pilot could simply fly south-southeast and know he would eventually spot Iwo Jima's distinctive Mount Suribachi rising from the ocean, assuming he had enough fuel. The logistics of annihilation, abundance versus scarcity. The logistics supporting each force revealed the true stark nature of the Pacific Air War, a contest between American abundance and Japanese catastrophic scarcity. Every single mission from Iwo Jima involved nearly 100 Mustangs, each consuming approximately 600 gallons of high-octane fuel and carrying 2,300 rounds of 50-caliber ammunition, plus bombs and rockets for potential ground attack missions. This staggering consumption represented just one day's operations from one base, and there were 3 fighter groups operating from Iwo Jima alone. Behind this immense effort stood an unparalleled supply chain, stretching back to factories in Detroit, vast refineries in Texas, and massive ammunition plants in Missouri, all connected by Liberty ships produced at an incredible rate of 3 per day, and C-54 Skymaster transport aircraft that flew regular high-capacity cargo routes across the Pacific. Ships arrived at Iwo Jima daily, efficiently unloading fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, mail, and the 1,000 other essential items needed to keep a modern, technologically advanced Air Force operational at peak efficiency. Meanwhile, Japanese logistics had collapsed into an abyss of chaos and desperation. Aviation fuel was so critically scarce that vital training flights were canceled, leaving new pilots to face combat with little to no recent flying experience. Ammunition was severely rationed even for combat missions, with pilots sternly told to conserve rounds for only the most certain shots. The Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces, never well coordinated even in the best of times, now competed desperately for dwindling resources like starving dogs fighting over scraps. Aircraft were routinely cannibalized for spare parts until they were nothing but aluminum skeletons, and entire fighter groups were grounded for a lack of basic components like tires, spark plugs, or hydraulic fluid. Some desperate units attempted to manufacture their own spare parts in primitive workshops, with predictably poor and unreliable results. The technological sophistication gap extended far beyond the aircraft themselves to every aspect of operations. American pilots wore G-suits that prevented blackouts in high-G maneuvers by squeezing blood back to the brain, maintaining their combat effectiveness. They used standardized oxygen systems that functioned reliably above 3,000 feet with automatic flow regulation, preventing hypoxia and disorientation. They communicated via crystal-clear VHF radios with excellent reception and multiple channels, ensuring coordinated tactics. Their parachutes were regularly inspected and repacked by trained personnel. Their life rafts contained working radios and fresh supplies, and their survival kits included everything from morphine to fishing gear. Japanese pilots often flew without functioning radios. Their vacuum tube radios consumed precious battery power and rarely worked properly anyway. They used notoriously unreliable oxygen systems that frequently failed above 2,000 feet, leading to dangerous hypoxia and disorientation, and had no G-suits, severely limiting their ability to match aggressive American maneuvering without blacking out or suffering painful broken blood vessels in their eyes. Black Friday and the crushing of morale, the unseen enemy. On June 1, 1945, a day infamously dubbed Black Friday by the Mustang men, weather rather than enemy action proved to be the greatest threat, starkly demonstrating that even American technology had its limits. Approximately 150 Mustangs en route to Osaka flew directly into a blinding, ferocious frontal system that wasn't supposed to be there according to the latest weather forecasts. In a matter of minutes, 27 aircraft were lost, with 24 of these losses directly attributed to the extreme weather. Pilots became disoriented in towering cumulus clouds, flying into each other, or simply running out of fuel while desperately trying to find clear air. This disaster illustrated that even for the technologically superior Americans, the very long-range missions pushed both men and machines to their absolute limits, highlighting the extreme dangers of oceanic flight. The weather front extended from sea level to a staggering 4,000 feet, bringing with it violent turbulence, severe icing conditions, and zero visibility. Pilots reported St. Elmo's fire dancing eerily on their wings, compasses spinning uselessly, and artificial horizons tumbling as their gyroscopes gave up trying to make sense of the violent, disorienting motion. The relentless pressure, combined with these audacious missions, had a catastrophic and irreversible impact on Japanese morale. Captain Yoshio Yoshida, a Ki-84 pilot with the 47th Sentai who miraculously survived the war, wrote in his diary, "The appearance of American fighters over Tokyo has shattered our confidence completely. We were told the B-29s were vulnerable without escort, that their fighters could never reach so far. Now we see Mustangs over the palace itself, strafing our airfields in broad daylight, shooting down our best pilots as if they were beginners. How can we defend the Emperor when the enemy's fighters roam freely over the sacred homeland?" The sight of those Mustangs with their invasion stripes so confident, so numerous, tells us what our leaders will not. The war is lost, and we are simply waiting to die. The myth of the divine wind, the supposed protection of Japan, was shattered when American fighters flew over the imperial palace itself, a direct and undeniable humiliation. The very long-range missions were an immense test of sheer flying skill, as Major Tapp stated in a post-war interview. Battling Japanese fighter pilots caused your adrenaline to flow, but getting from point A to point B was the hardest part. The ocean was endless, featureless, hypnotic. You'd check your compass constantly, wondering if it was wrong, if you'd somehow gotten turned around. The physical and mental strain was enormous and cumulative. Pilots stayed strapped into their cockpits for 8 hours or more, often unable to stand, unable to stretch, unable to relieve themselves except into a relief tube that frequently froze at altitude. They dealt with cramping legs that felt like they were being stabbed with needles, numb buttocks that made them wonder if they'd ever walk again, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of flying a single-engine aircraft over vast, empty stretches of ocean where one mechanical failure meant almost certain death. The Mustang's cockpit ergonomics, refined through 3 years of intense combat experience and thousands of pilot reports, proved superior to Japanese designs in every measurable way. The P-51D featured a revolutionary bubble canopy, providing unparalleled 360-degree invisibility. Pilots could actually look behind them by turning their heads, a life-saving capability in combat. The seat was fully adjustable for pilots of different heights, the rudder pedals could be moved to accommodate different leg lengths, and all controls were positioned for minimum pilot fatigue during long missions. The instrument panel was logically arranged with the most important instruments, airspeed, altitude, engine gauges directly in the pilot's line of sight. The Ki-84's cockpit, while an improvement over earlier Japanese fighters like the Zero, still suffered from poor visibility to the rear due to structural members and the fuel tank behind the pilot's head. It also had awkwardly placed controls that required pilots to take their hands off the stick at critical moments, and instruments that were difficult to read in combat conditions, especially when pulling Gs or when vibration from the engine made everything blur. Armament differences proved decisive in combat outcomes, often determining who lived and who died in the split-second encounters that characterized aerial combat. The P-51D's 650 caliber machine guns, while seemingly less impressive on paper than the Ki-84's mixed cannon armament, offered crucial advantages that combat experience had proven decisive. The American guns were extraordinarily reliable, with stoppage rates well below 1% when properly maintained, which they always were, thanks to dedicated armament specialists. They carried far more ammunition, 1880 to 2800 rounds total, compared to the Ki-84's paltry 400 rounds for its cannons and machine guns combined. This massive ammunition load meant American pilots could afford to take ranging shots, could engage multiple targets, and didn't have to worry about running out of ammunition after a few terrifying seconds of firing. The ballistics of the 50 caliber rounds were so well understood that American pilots could reliably engage targets at 400 yards. Japanese pilots, with their mixed cannon and machine gun armament, struggled with convergent zones and different ballistic trajectories, their cannon rounds dropping differently than their machine gun rounds, making accurate shooting nearly impossible beyond close range. The training difference in gunnery was even more pronounced. American pilots had fired thousands of rounds in training, learning to lead targets, to estimate range, and to fire in short, controlled bursts to avoid overheating their guns. They practiced on towed sleeves, on camera guns, and in mock dogfights until deflection shooting became instinctive. Japanese pilots in 1945 were lucky to fire 100 rounds in training, if that. Ammunition was too precious to waste on training when it was desperately needed for combat. Many went into their first combat having never fired their guns at all, forced to learn deflection shooting while someone was actively trying to kill them. The final act. The unstoppable tide, and the end of an era. The Sunsetters' last recorded aerial combat occurred near Tokyo on August 10, 1945, when the 15th and 56th Fighter Groups claimed 7 kills in what would be one of the final significant air battles of World War II. By this point, Japanese resistance had become almost token, a mere shadow of the once formidable force that had swept across the Pacific. Crippling fuel shortages meant most Japanese fighters were grounded, their precious tanks drained to provide fuel for desperate kamikaze aircraft. Those few that did manage to fly were often piloted by teenagers with minimal training, boys who had been in high school just months before. In all, Iwo Jima's Mustangs were credited with an astonishing 206 Japanese airplanes shot down between April and August 1945, accounting for 75% of all Pacific P-51 aerial victories. The actual number was probably higher, as many Japanese aircraft shot down over Japan were never officially confirmed, their wreckage lost in dense forests or sprawling urban areas. The strategic impact extended far beyond aerial victories, fundamentally reshaping the entire Pacific War. The constant, intimidating presence of P-51s over Japan meant B-29s could bomb in daylight with unprecedented accuracy, systematically dismantling Japan's remaining industrial infrastructure. Japanese industrial production, already crippled by material shortages and relentless B-29 raids, ground to a halt under precision daylight bombing and almost surgical destruction from above. The psychological effect was equally devastating. Japanese civilians could now clearly see American fighters strafing airfields in broad daylight, shooting up trains and attacking shipping in Tokyo Bay, making it chillingly clear that Japan had lost all control of its own airspace. The comforting myth of the divine wind, kamikaze, that would protect Japan was shattered when American fighters, emblazoned with their confident invasion stripes, flew with impunity over the Imperial Palace itself. Lieutenant Colonel John R. Morgan of the 457th Fighter Squadron conducted several photo reconnaissance missions over Japan in a specially modified P-51D with cameras in place of guns. His reports revealed the shocking extent of Japanese aviation collapse. We'd fly over airfields that intelligence said had hundreds of aircraft. We'd find maybe a dozen flyable planes. The rest were derelicts. No engines, no propellers, some just shells cannibalized for parts. They'd push wrecks around to make it look like they had more operational aircraft for our photo interpreters. But we could tell the difference between a real airplane and a Hulk. Some airfields even had fake wooden aircraft, complete with painted markings, trying to draw our attacks away from real planes hidden in revetments or under camouflage. The industrial mathematics were irrefutable and told the story of the war in stark, undeniable numbers. The United States produced an astounding 15,586 P-51s of all variants during the war, more than Japan's total production of all aircraft types in 1944 and 1945 combined. Japan managed to produce approximately 3,500 Ki-84s, but many were destroyed on the ground by B-29 raids and carrier strikes, lost in training accidents due to abysmal quality control, or simply grounded for an acute lack of parts. American production lines were hitting their stride just as Japanese production collapsed. North American Aviation alone was producing 20 P-51s per day at peak production, more than Japan produced Ki-84s in an entire month. Crucially, each American aircraft was essentially identical, with interchangeable parts, while Japanese aircraft varied wildly in quality and performance, even within the same production batch. The training pipeline told a similar story of overwhelming American advantage. By 1945, the United States was training 3,000 pilots annually, each receiving 200 to 300 hours of flight instruction before advanced fighter training, then another 100 hours of specialized combat training. Japan's pilot training program had essentially collapsed, with new pilots receiving perhaps 50 hours before being sent to operational units, often much less. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable. America could replace losses while maintaining consistent quality. Japan could not replace losses, even with dramatically reduced standards. For every pilot Japan trained, America trained 10, and the American pilots were demonstrably far better prepared. Fuel consumption revealed the strategic endgame in stark detail. Each P-51 mission from Iwo Jima consumed approximately 600 gallons of 100-octane fuel per aircraft, internal fuel plus drop tanks. With 100 aircraft per mission and daily operations, this meant 6,000 gallons per day for one fighter group alone. American tankers delivered millions of gallons monthly to Pacific bases, a literal river of fuel flowing across the Pacific, underpinning every operation. Japan, meanwhile, was attempting to extract aviation fuel from pine roots, requiring a staggering 200 pine stumps to produce just 1 gallon of barely usable fuel. This desperate measure was a clear indicator of their collapse, forcing them to convert dwindling training aircraft into single-use kamikaze weapons because they simply lacked the fuel for conventional operations. By August 1945, Japan had less than 2,000 gallons of aviation fuel remaining in the home islands, barely enough for perhaps one major desperate operation. The technological revolution represented by the P-51D went beyond mere performance statistics. It embodied an entire philosophy of warfare. The aircraft itself epitomized American industrial philosophy: mass production with stringent quality control, standardization across manufacturers, and continuous improvement based on real-world combat feedback. Every P-51D that rolled off the production line was essentially identical, with perfectly interchangeable parts and predictable, consistent performance. A pilot could climb into any P-51D and know exactly how it would fly, exactly where every switch and instrument would be located. Japanese aircraft, increasingly hand-built with variable quality materials and substitute components, showed wide performance variations even within the same production batch. One Ki-84 might be capable of 400 millimeters, while another from the same factory might struggle to exceed 350 millimeters due to these crippling manufacturing inconsistencies. Brigadier General Ernest M. Moore, commander of 7th Fighter Command, would later write, "I don't believe there's any question about the P-51 being the best prop fighter of World War II. It was our top air fighter and hence best for escort missions and equal to the P-47 as an attacker against ground targets." This assessment reflected not just the aircraft's raw performance, but its unparalleled reliability, ease of maintainability, and remarkable adaptability to the extreme demands of very long-range operations. A P-51 could be refueled and rearmed in a mere 30 minutes, could fly twice a day if needed, and could operate from rough improvised coral runways that would have destroyed more delicate aircraft. The maintenance statistics were telling and revealed another crucial dimension of American superiority. P-51Ds at Iwo Jima maintained an operational ready rate above 80% despite the incredibly harsh conditions. Abrasive volcanic dust that got into everything, corrosive salt air that rapidly attacked aluminum, and minimal facilities that meant most maintenance was performed outdoors, exposed to the elements. Ground crews, highly trained and working with standardized procedures, could perform an engine change in as little as 4 hours using mobile cranes. Battle damage that would ground a Japanese fighter for weeks could often be repaired overnight, using prefabricated parts flown in from the States. The Ki-84, even when precious fuel and ammunition were available, suffered from abysmal serviceability rates, often below 40%, sometimes as low as a crippling 20%. The complex Homar engine required specialized tools that often didn't exist in the field, trained technicians who were mostly dead or drafted into combat units, and spare parts that often had to be painstakingly hand-fitted because manufacturing tolerances were so poor. This meant that a large percentage of Japan's best fighters were simply unusable at any given time. Weather reconnaissance provided another crucial advantage that saved countless American lives. Dedicated B-29s acting as weatherbirds flew reconnaissance missions hours before fighter operations, reporting critical cloud conditions, wind speeds, and frontal systems. These flights provided detailed meteorological data that helped commanders plan optimal routes around the worst weather, significantly reducing operational hazards. Though, as Black Friday tragically showed, weather could still surprise even the best prepared missions. Japanese forces, lacking such sophisticated capabilities, often flew blind into weather that destroyed entire formations. The American ability to predict and, where possible, avoid adverse weather fronts reduced operational losses significantly, while Japanese units suffered catastrophic weather-related losses that frequently exceeded combat casualties. The communication infrastructure supporting American operations was revolutionary for its time. High-frequency radio beacons transmitted from submarines and island bases provided critical navigation assistance. Submarine-based rescue coordination could vector search aircraft to downed pilots, and real-time weather updates created a safety network that gave pilots the confidence to push the extreme range capabilities of their aircraft. The psychological value of knowing that if you went down, someone would come looking for you cannot be overstated. It fundamentally changed the calculus of risk. Japanese pilots, often flying with no working radio and no hope of rescue if forced down over the vast ocean, faced each mission with a fatalistic acceptance of probable death. Their farewell ceremonies before missions were literal. They fully expected never to return. Captain Harry Krim Jr. of the 531st Fighter Squadron, who would become an ace over Japan with 7 victories, observed the strategic reality with brutal clarity. We owned the sky over Japan. We could go where we wanted, when we wanted. The Japanese knew it, we knew it, and most importantly, Japanese civilians knew it. Every P-51 over Tokyo was proof that Japan had lost the war. We weren't fighting for air superiority anymore. We had it. We were just demonstrating it, rubbing their noses in it, showing them that resistance was futile. Why, the very long-range missions fundamentally changed the strategic equation in the Pacific, rendering all previous calculations obsolete. No longer could Japan rely on sheer distance to protect the home islands. The tyranny of distance that had shielded them for centuries was irrevocably broken. The industrial heartland that had survived relatively untouched for 3 years of war was now exposed to daily devastating attack. The constant, ominous appearance of American fighters over Tokyo shattered the last illusions about Japan's ability to defend itself, destroyed the myth of the divine wind, and made clear that defeat was not just possible, but tragically inevitable. The human cost reflected the technological disparity in cruel mathematical terms. Between July 1st and August 15, 1945, fully 85 American fighter pilots lost their lives on VLR missions. However, only a handful were claimed in air-to-air combat, perhaps 5 or 6. Most losses were operational, weather, mechanical failure, navigation errors, or sheer exhaustion, causing pilots to make fatal mistakes. Japanese pilot losses in the same period numbered in the hundreds, perhaps over 1,000, with entire squadrons eliminated in futile attempts to intercept American formations. The 47th Sentai, which had started April with 40 operational pilots, had just 3 remaining by August. The 244th Sentai was completely destroyed, reformed with fresh pilots, and then tragically destroyed again. The last desperate dogfights over Japan revealed the final collapse of Japanese air power as an organized, effective force. On August 14, 1945, August 15th in Japan due to the international dateline, Lieutenant Jerry Yellin flew what would be the last combat mission of the war. Taking off from Iwo Jima with his wingman, 19-year-old Second Lieutenant Philip Schlamberg, they attacked airfields near Nagoya. The mission had been planned before word of Japan's surrender reached the field, and the code word Utah that would have recalled them never reached their radios. Yellin and Schlamberg strafed their targets and turned for home, banking into a cloud formation to escape furious anti-aircraft fire. When Yellin emerged from the clouds, Schlamberg was gone, shot down by ground fire to become the last American combat death of World War II. Even in defeat, with the war literally ending and the Emperor having already recorded his surrender broadcast, Japanese anti-aircraft positions continued firing with desperate, futile determination. But notably absent were Japanese fighters. They had essentially ceased to exist as an effective force, grounded by lack of fuel, lack of pilots, or simply destroyed. The mathematics of the air war were final and irrefutable, written in aluminum and blood across the skies of Japan. The P-51D Mustang, with its 440 mph top speed, 2,000-mile range with drop tanks, and 6 reliable machine guns firing nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition, had rendered the Japanese home islands defenseless against daylight air attack. The Ki-84 Hayate, despite its theoretical capabilities and the unquestionable courage of its pilots, never had the numbers, the reliability, or the pilot quality to mount an effective defense. It was not a contest between equals, but a foregone conclusion, the result determined as much by factories in Detroit and oil wells in Texas as by individual combat over Tokyo. American industrial might, expressed through the magnificent P-51 Mustang, had achieved what naval blockade and island hopping alone could not: the complete elimination of Japan's ability to defend its airspace. The B-29s that dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki flew without fighter escort, not because none was available, but because none was needed. Japanese fighter opposition had been swept from the skies, crushed by the overwhelming superiority of American technology, training, and production. Out of 3,514 Ki-84s built, only one survives today. It sits in the Chiran Peace Museum in Kagoshima, Japan, a solitary, poignant reminder of Japan's desperate, ultimately futile attempt to match overwhelming American technological superiority. Meanwhile, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs survive in museums and private collections worldwide. Many still take to the skies, flying at air shows, their Merlin engines singing the triumphant song of American industrial might, 7 decades after they first appeared in the skies over Tokyo. The disparity in surviving aircraft tells its own story. American aircraft were built to last, meticulously maintained with care and valued as historical artifacts. Japanese aircraft were built for immediate, desperate use, often expected to be destroyed in combat and treated as ultimately expendable. The profound shock experienced by Japanese pilots encountering P-51 Mustangs over Tokyo was more than just tactical surprise. It was the stunning realization that American industrial capacity and relentless technological advancement had made even the impossible routine. Single-engine fighters flying 1,500-mile combat missions, arriving with enough fuel to fight for 2 hours, and then returning safely to base. This was a capability utterly beyond Japanese comprehension or effective response. The P-51D Mustang over Mount Fuji was not merely an aircraft. It was the powerful embodiment of American industrial supremacy, relentless technological innovation, and the inexorable mathematics of total war. The lesson was clear and brutal. In modern industrial warfare, superior technology multiplied by massive efficient production equals victory. The P-51D Mustang represented American industry at its peak. Over 15,000 aircraft produced with consistent quality, flown by supremely well-trained pilots, supported by unlimited logistics, and deployed with strategic precision. Against this overwhelming force, Japan's Ki-84 Hayate, despite individual courage and occasional tactical success, stood no chance. The shock of American fighters over Tokyo was ultimately the shock of a crushing mathematical reality. A reality that ended with atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, delivered by B-29s that no longer needed fighter escort because Japanese air power had utterly ceased to exist. The Mustangs had done their job with ruthless, devastating efficiency. They had proven that distance was no defense, that industrial might trumped warrior spirit, and that technological superiority, properly applied, was an insurmountable advantage. The Japanese pilots who faced them in those final desperate months learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Courage alone cannot overcome the overwhelming mathematics of industrial production, technological advancement, and logistical supremacy. The P-51D Mustang over Tokyo was undeniable proof that the age of the samurai had truly ended, brutally replaced by the age of the production line, the supercharger, and the very long-range fighter escort. The divine wind had been irrevocably conquered by science, the warrior spirit broken by industrial might, and the empire of the rising sun ultimately overshadowed by wings of aluminum and engines of steel.